All right, all right, all right. Welcome back to another edition of Texans Unfiltered, a Houston football podcast for your Houston Texans. I am Youngarigold, and I am joined. Honestly, John, I feel like I could say friend at this point. I can't say that about a lot of people I have come on. Me and you spent hours talking hip hop
Yeah,
at an event. We talk on Twitter. You're here now. I have John Hickman from Locked On Texans, who I do consider a friend, which is just it's not something I get to say very often. John, thank you for coming on the show today. I'm super excited to talk some Texans with you.
absolutely, man. Listen, we were talking in the pre-show, and it's super early right now. Not as early as I'm normally up, but I didn't have anything planned to do today outside of joining you on this show. And I'm gonna be real with you. I don't do it for nothing friends. So I'm super excited to be here with my boy James, and hopefully for the listeners out there, you guys stick around to where James and I get to talking about music because that'll probably be the more interesting point of the show. But Texans, I know we got to talk Texans first.
Yeah, I would agree. I think me and you, it's interesting how we could just talk it and it just be natural for us to talk music because you would think that would be the case with the Texans, and it is. But for some reason, music's just so easy. All right, John, I know you're familiar with the show, but not. I know you don't watch on a daily basis or whatever I record. You can never guess when I'm going to record, so that's one of the unfortunates of me. But I read this book called "The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck" last year. It's one of my favorite books.
We can
And they
curse.
had a
Wait a minute.
oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. No,
Unfiltered.
this is
Okay.
yeah, no, this is Texans
All right.
Unfiltered.
Okay.
There is nobody
Shit.
governs what the fuck we do here. So they put out a calendar for 2023 called Unfuck Yourself. I always start off with what the Unfuck Yourself is for the day. This one's long. So March 17th on a Friday. It's not a case of I am a procrastinator, something you are, but rather I procrastinate, which is something you do. And if it's just something you do, then you should do another thing instead. This isn't some personal condition or affliction or something that you have. It's not a fucking disease. Sheesh.
So is that saying look at the action and not the actor in that sense? It's like
Basically, it's saying like you say you're a procrastinator, but really, honestly, you're choosing to procrastinate. So it's an action you're taking mentally. You can choose not to procrastinate and not be a procrastinator.
look
So
at the verb, not the
pull,
noun.
pull that shit out and
Yeah,
just say what
I
it
like that.
actually is. Yeah.
That's a good
Um,
perspective. That's a good
it
perspective.
is. It is. It is. I do this every time. I'm sure nobody probably even cares about it. It's more for me mentally. Um, but yeah, I love it. I love just if you're not investing in yourself, bro, I don't know what you're doing.
I think that's the perfect like what you just said. Now I haven't heard the rest of the breakdowns, but if you look at what you're doing, there's a bunch of other things in the world you could be doing. And why
Right.
not do the better things, the more healthier things, the things that could be more impactful than procrastinating. And I'm glad you said that because I procrastinate. See, I'm about to say it.
There we go.
I
See?
procrastinate. So there
Yeah.
are opportunities for me to not procrastinate. And that's a changed behavior that should be I'm gonna focus on that, changing that behavior.
There
I
we
like
go.
that
There
one,
we
man. That
go.
was dope.
Good, good, good. And then I noticed the is that the Lower Marion High School Kobe Bryant jersey in the back?
Yeah, man. Kobe's
Okay,
always
so
with me. I don't know about everybody else, but between Kobe and UT, and if you look over here, got my DJ screw posted up. I need a bigger one, but that's my background, man.
I
I
see.
gotta
I don't think
remix it a little bit.
this is something you and I have never talked about, but I mean, originally so I was born in Houston, left when I was 2, grew up in LA, came back to Houston when I was 17. So I'm a diehard Laker fan. My dad took me to Laker games. Kobe Bryant is my favorite basketball player of all time. I mimic a lot of what Kobe did. I take a lot of what Kobe did and try to apply as much of it as I can to my life. I think, and I'll say this, and it seems to be something people are not afraid to say as much anymore, but I think Kobe Bryant is the best pure basketball player I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen Jordan.
Man, so when we talk about I know we get into Texans, but I like this because it's natural. When we talk about best basketball, you have to be a historian. I think
Yep.
so. Like YouTube is out there, research is out there. So I always look at Kareem as the guy I will point to and say, he didn't lose in college. I don't think he lost in high school. Came in and won with Milwaukee, then ended up winning with LA. He gets lost in translation a lot in terms of who is the best basketball player. Then you got to look at college and NBA. But to get back to Kobe, man, I think, and I'm okay with saying this, I think Kobe is the best basketball player of all time. I think when you argue Michael and LeBron, and LeBron has the strongest case of being the best basketball player of all time because LeBron was the only basketball player that I can say lived up to the Michael Jordan hype. Michael Jordan didn't have Michael Jordan hype when he came out. He was just Michael
Right.
Jordan. So
Right.
Michael Jordan is the guy that set that standard, which is why he is, again, arguably the greatest of all time. But LeBron was a high schooler living up to Michael's hype, came into the league, lived up to Michael's hype, and then we see where he is now as the quote unquote greatest scorer of all time, holding the scoring title. Kobe didn't have that though. Like Kobe wasn't the one that got the keys to the franchise the moment he was drafted. And I think a lot of people look at Kobe and say, man, you are the basketball player that not only worked to get better at their craft, but worked in order to gain control of a franchise that at the time had Shaq and chose you over Shaq. So they made that investment, and I think they paid off for LA. But then I don't think nobody did what Kobe was able to do offensively, learning how to operate in the post as a guard. You look at Jordan, the guys he had to go up against. He had some dogs in his era, but Kobe had prime AI, prime T-Mac, prime, the combo guard era when, Baron Davis and them boys was coming out with Steve Francis and Vince Carter. And it was just a different shift of players. Then Kobe had to go up against the LeBrons, the KDs, that type of era.
Steve Nash, Dirk Nowitzki, like the list can go
on, and figured out ways to defensively, psychologically, technical win battles against those guys.
Yep.
And I don't think the Jordan era had those type of players. And they've had great players, but I think Jordan dominated in an era where it was still considered a big man era. To where 96 comes around. That 96 class changed the NBA forever. Forever. And then again, like the way Kobe was a spokesperson for the game. Like those type of things, I think all builds into Kobe as a basketball player. And that's why I think Kobe is the greatest basketball player of all time.
Yeah, I think when I say Kobe Bryant is the best basketball player I've ever seen or the best basketball player of all time, if I remove accolades, if I take accolades out of the conversation completely, and we go off of pure talent, we go off of pure basketball IQ, we go off of the approach to the game, I don't think it's something that you can really honestly have a conversation and say, you can't talk about Kobe Bryant with Michael Jordan. Yes. You can't.
You can't. And I think pure fundamental perspective.
Yeah, from a pure fundamental perspective, you are not allowed to take Kobe Bryant out of that conversation. And if you are, you didn't watch. Because from a technique perspective, he was by far he was in his own class, bro. I mean, he really was. And he was a student of the game to a point to where, I mean, the guy was always working. It never stopped. It was a continuous thing. And it led down to obviously Gianna and everything else to what he was building. So I never knew that about you when it came to Kobe. Yeah, crazy.
I think that people have to be honest with themselves and say, at the very least, Kobe has a seat at that table, which is why I wanted to bring up Kareem, because a lot of people that argue the greatest, they leave out Kareem. And it's like, if you are a true historian of basketball, the NBA and college or whatever, you know that he has a true seat at that table. Kobe has that. And it's the way that he went about the game. You hear stories all the time about Kobe, like, I got to the gym, it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and Kobe was already there. And I came
We
back
were
at
just getting
5
back from the
p.m.
club.
and we got bottles and everything. And
Yeah.
Kobe was already in the gym. And, so like his approach to basketball and life, man, it just it goes hand in hand. It's inspiration. But on the court, man, Kobe was a killer.
He was a
Like
killer.
pure killer. And
yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can talk about Kobe.
I've never seen somebody. I've seen MJ take over a game. Don't get me wrong, and I don't want to belittle Michael Jordan. You really can't belittle Michael Jordan. But when Kobe takes over a game, it's just this. I don't know. There's like when growing up watching it live and not watching YouTube and like being a part of what that looks like. It's a totally different experience because you just know at that point nobody's stopping him.
It's few players that can take over a game like that.
Yeah.
Jordan, Kobe, Dirk, Steph. Steph is one of the more recent, like Steph would deflate an arena. AI was one of those guys. Bron, KD. Like it's
guys, just not consistent.
It's not, but it's a few batch of players that when they get to take it over a game, I feel bad if you're rooting for the other team. And I'm a Rockets fan. Diehard Rockets fan. So I've seen those playoff battles, and I'm looking at Kobe, who's my favorite player. I'm looking at my favorite franchise. We're up by 1, but we got a whole fourth quarter we got to play. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't think we're going to pull this one out.
Yeah, it's funny. I forgot what year it was, but we were playing the Rockets in the playoffs, and it was 2000s.
2008 or 9 when Ron Artest, Tracy was out. Y'all went down. If y'all is in that game, I think we win that series. But y'all goes down, and that's the Ron Artest year, I believe.
So the Rockets have a special place in my heart. My uncle. So when I was living in LA, I would actually fly out here over the summer, and my uncle would always take me to Rockets games. So those were the first basketball games I ever got to go to. So I went to the Compaq Center, got to see Akeem, and really, I've always had a special place in my heart for the Rockets, but they're always like team 2 for me. But in that 2008, 2009, I was full Kobe mode, full Laker mode. I went with the Kobe jersey. I was rocking my, Adidas Crazy 8s. Like I was such a obnoxious Laker fan, and I made it a point to be because I was in Houston, and we're leaving the game. I'm talking a bunch of shit. We ended up winning, and I get circled, and people are just throwing their drinks at me. It became this entire thing. Yeah, no, it was real bad. It was my fault. It was absolutely my fault. I was super young at the time. I won't do that again. But it was. I just love the Lakers, and I think some fans can get it. All right, Texans.
Sorry, guys.
All right, so Houston Texans. Houston Texans free agency. I wouldn't say free agency is over. I think Denzel Perryman was here yesterday. I think if we sign a linebacker, there's a good chance that Denzel Perryman is the linebacker signed probably within the next day or two, probably at least over the weekend. It seems like he's taking his time. He's an older linebacker, so he definitely is looking for the right fit for him. But the Texans free agency, where they're at right now, look, John, it started off slow. You scroll through Texans Twitter quite a bit. I scroll through Texans Twitter quite a bit. There was a true sentiment around Texans Twitter that Nick was going to do nothing. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what people were saying, that Nick is going to not add any depth, any real talent to this roster in free agency. He has this astronomical number. People made $40 million seem like it was $120 million to me. It was super weird. And then out of nowhere, we start to see little signings. And then the complaint is 2-year deals. And everybody's saying they're done. They're done. But then the big one comes. And it's really not that big, but it is big. And then Sheldon Rankins gets signed. And then it's like, okay, the defensive line's looking like it could be something. There's some potential here. What were your biggest takeaways from Texans free agency? Obviously, and let me run down who we signed. So the Texans signed Robert Woods, Jimmy Ward, Sheldon Rankins, Case Keenum, Andrew Beck. Tremont Smith is back, which I actually think is one of the bigger pieces of free agency. Hassan Ridgeway, Mike Boone, Noah Brown, or not. No, I'm sorry, not Tremont Smith. Yeah, Tremont Smith.
Tremont Smith.
Did we end up signing Tavier Thomas?
Tavier signs a
Tommy is. That's right.
1-year deal.
And Chase Vinovich, which I think is actually a underdog signing. What were your thoughts on free agency now that it's over? And do you think this team is taking a pretty significant step forward based on paper?
My thoughts on free agency is I think Nick Casserio does have trust issues, commitment issues, I'd say. But, he said at the press conference at the Combine that they look at things in a 2-year window. And so the 2-year deals doesn't shock me. I would have liked to get a 28-year-old Sheldon Rankins on a multi-year deal. He signed for a 1-year deal with Houston. I think he was the player that if I look at any of the guys that Houston signed in free agency, I will have loved to get him on a 3-year deal because I think Malik Collins has one more year left on his deal.
Yep.
And I think Houston does go D tackle at some point in the draft. I'm also a believer that we will see a more of an impact out of Thomas Booker this year, simply because I trust the job that DeMeco Ryans and his defensive coaching staff would do with a guy like that. I think he's athletic enough to win some of these, one-on-one battles. He just needs to learn the NFL. But I like the Sheldon Rankins signing. Would have liked it for it to be longer. I loved Houston swapping late-round picks for Shaq Mason.
I thought that was a big.
That was big
trade, bro.
So when we look at free agency overall, that probably was the biggest win for him. Sheldon Rankins was a big win, but Houston, and you know what? I would say Sheldon Rankins and Shaq Mason is tied what because when Sheldon Rankins is on the field, the Jets only allow, I think, 3.8 yards per rush. And this is a team 170 yards per game, 150, 160. Like they've been bad at stopping the run. And I also believe that Malik Collins, who's been good for Houston, hasn't had a decent running mate, a consistent running mate on the opposite side to help with the interior gaps. And so that was huge. But Shaq Mason, man, it makes re-signing Scott Quisenberry makes more sense now because now you bring him a guy that can dominate at right guard, and you also bring in a guy that I believe can help bring up Kenyon Green. And then I think Houston goes young and cheap in the draft by drafting a center to, eventually take over. But Shaq Mason was huge. Protect your franchise quarterback, whoever that'll be. And I also like the signing of Noah Brown, simply because I think that Noah Brown was one of those developmental guys that Dallas kept for the last 5 years. And finally, he had a quote-unquote breakout year, career highs last season for Dallas when other guys were either injured and not stepping up or not getting playing time. He played well in his role. I also like the fact that he blocks well downfield. I mentioned early on the Locked On Texans show this week that Bobby Slowick, who's coming over from San Fran, if you guys remember that 75-yard TD that Deebo Samuel scored against Seattle, that play was made possible simply because Brandon Ayuk was blocking downfield, So I think that's important in this type of offense. And I think Houston is going scheme fit over talent, which is why you may have not seen them go out some of the top tier guys. I would have loved that they would have got TJ Edwards or Tremaine Edmonds. Would have loved that type of signing, but I don't think that's their focus right now, mainly because they have a lot of money next year that they can play around with. And I do believe that this team between DeMeco Ryans and Nick Casserio feels as though it's important to get younger through the draft and get better with the talent through the draft. And this year's draft is loaded with talent. I think offensive line is probably the weakest position this year, but at linebackers, at corner, at receiver, running back, you can find a running back probably in the 5th or 6th round, and this guy would be able to contribute down the line in his career. So to get back to free agency, not to hold you guys too long, I thought Houston had a decent free agency. Would have loved that they would have got some of the guys that maybe was a little bit more splashier. The Mike Boones, I didn't understand that. The Andrew Beck, I thought that was a waste of time and money. But Noah Brown, to a certain extent, Robert Woods, Shaq Mason, and I would even say Chase Winovich was decent simply because they were losing Ogbo Okoronkwo, who I believe Houston should have targeted to come back. He was a player that I thought Houston should have retained. That was an understandable signing. Wouldn't want to put a grade on it, but they made some moves that I think fans should be happy about.
Yeah, I would agree. I think overall, the theme for me with free agency was to plug holes that are obviously very big holes that everybody noticed last season. The one you can't address everything in free agency. So, the center, they were in the center market. They were in. I know for a fact that they were in on two.
Brindle, I think Brindle was one from San
Brindle was
Fran.
one of them, and then Bozeman was the other.
Bozeman.
But
He
both,
was a guy that I
but
liked
both,
too.
but both were. I mean, I think when people say, "Oh my God, Nick didn't convince them to come," it's like there's so much more that these players have to take into consideration when it comes to signing. Familiarity with the offense, familiarity with the organization, those are big, but like not moving your family across country, not pulling your kids out of school and putting them in new schools. Like there's so many different pieces that move that are a part of this decision for the players. And you just can't fix everything in free agency. Not only can you not, but like the teams that do, they tend to not be much better than they were the years prior because you're reaching and overpaying for players to fit a need.
Right.
So I think Sheldon Rankins is a huge get.
Jimmy Ward too, by the way. I forgot Jimmy Ward was big. Jimmy Ward was big.
It's going to be interesting to see how they play him in this. If he's going to play a very similar role to what he did in D'Amico's defense, then, they're going to have to probably address safety in the draft as well. But, they need a linebacker. They need a center. And they need wide receivers and they're going to need to add a quarterback. But I like Rankins. I think Shaq Mason, when I look at that and I think about this offensive line as a whole, Laramie, Kenyon, question mark. Right now, we'll say Quisenberry at center, who was very bad last year. Let's just be honest. There's not much we can say. He wasn't a very good center.
I say something?
He is depth. What?
Given the situation, like Britt just completely said, hey, I'm out, right?
Sure,
and I hope everything with Britt is okay mentally, physically. But Britt just chunked the deuce and got up out of town.
Yeah.
So given the situation and circumstances, I know Quisenberry was like bad, but I think he was decent in the role that he had to fill on the fly. Like you understand that he was a depth guy, and eventually you want Houston to address that center position, like not eventually, like ASAP, and I think it will happen in the draft. But bringing him back still, to me, makes sense because you're going to go through the draft, I believe, and you're going to find a center that, okay, we want you to play, but let's give Quisenberry some time real quick to get you ready, kind of like what they did with Kenyon Green last season. So, like, I know a lot of people are out on Quisenberry, and I get it, but given the circumstances, I'm not too mad at him coming back.
Well, I also, I talked a lot about like Kenyon Green's development and then the impact of not having like a good center to help Kenyon develop, right? Because in that offense last year, everything kind of rolled through the center. So if you don't have a guy that you can count on being there, that's talented and can coach you up as a guard, right? Centers calling protections, things of that nature. It's really hard for a rookie to develop. Now let's go back to like Quisenberry. You have a rookie guard, and then you have AJ Cann, who has played really well in his career, but did not play well for the first, I would say, 12 to 13 games, to be honest with you, at right guard.
That's fair.
So Quisenberry's having to pick up the slack for now a rookie and then also another guard that's not playing very well. So I wouldn't say we know what Quisenberry is, but I don't believe he's the starting center. But you want to sign somebody you're familiar with and what their weaknesses, what their strengths are, whatever it may be. He was fine in the run game. He was not very good in the passing game. Interior pressures where all NFL defense are spending their draft capital and their free agent money. Like they know that they need to collapse that pocket from the inside. So, the game's starting to change a little bit from the interior. But I'm not mad about Quisenberry. I know everybody was in an uproar. I don't really see it as much of a concern as most people. I would say that the Shaq Mason piece, though, and this goes back to what I just said about like Kenyon, Quisenberry, and Cann. Now you're inserting a right guard that has a resume, is young enough, and can come in day one and have an impact. It's also going to help Titus because Titus hasn't had that guard next to him since he's been here. So
ever
that right side of the line has always been somewhat of a weak part because Titus was developing at his own pace, and then he had no guard next to him that was really worth holding any weight on the offensive line. Titus is now going to have that. Whatever center we sign, or if Quisenberry ends up being the starter, they're going to have a guy they can count on the right side, which they haven't had. So it's going to be really interesting. But I do think the Shaq Mason signing was the biggest one because it was such a massive upgrade for a position of need for the interior of the offensive line. I love Jimmy Ward. I really like Noah Brown a lot too. I don't expect like 900 yards. I expect a 550, 600 yards, but his, he's going to be the Kevin Walters for everybody that remembers what that Texans team looked like. Kevin Walters was the unsung hero behind the Arian Foster, Andre Johnson, Matt Schaub offense that Gary Kubiak ran here. I think Noah Brown's going to be very similar to that. I think we're going to see him blocking a lot, and that's one of his strengths. And don't be surprised if you see the Texans target wide receivers that have that ability to do, especially also at tight end. Like, we all want a Travis Kelce, first and foremost. Very hard to find one. So they're probably going to prioritize blocking over receiving at tight end as well, because if it's the offensive scheme.
I think they got that blocking tight end on the roster already.
In
Tegan Quintoriano.
I always forget how to say his name. Yeah,
Tegan Quintoriano, TQ, man. When I watched
he looks like a beast.
Yeah, no. When I watched him play last year, of course he wasn't targeted, much. So there's the intangibles in a game when you're not getting featured as much. You have to look for the intangibles, and he does a very good job of blocking at the line of scrimmage. He's also 6'6", 6'7", or something like that. Big. He's a big guy.
He's big.
And so I think this tight end group for the Texans is interesting. Do I think that they should add a tight end through the draft? I can see that because we don't know where they view Brevin Jordan. But I also will look at Brevin Jordan and say, man, how much of the quarterback play and the style of this offense did you suffer from? But then I also look at Brevin Jordan and say, how many of those mental mistakes and errors did you have last season to take away from your opportunities to get on the field? He had several healthy scratches, and I think that was due to his own merit of the lack of a production he was putting out there. So this tight end group is very interesting because I think they should bring back Jordan Akins as well. I think he played very good football for the Texans last year, unless you look at him as a guy that you thank him for coming back, but we also need to go in another direction. I can get that, that thought, but they got some talent in his room. That Drew Beck was just crazy to me. I didn't understand that one at all.
I get it. I think it's you want to bring in some competition for the fullback they had last year. So I understand it. It's a minimal contract. I think if you can find a Janovich type of fullback for this offense, it's going to open some things up for you. I'm not necessarily sure Andrew Beck is that, but I'm not too upset about it, especially when you look at the value of it. It's minimal. It's not really impacting if you can sign somebody else or not. But fullback is super important in the Niners style of offense. So it's like taking a swing on another fullback to see if maybe you can upgrade that position.
I get it from this standpoint. I think Harrison can do those things. And what we've seen from Nick before is, listen, I can sign you to a deal right now. That don't mean you're going to play in the season. And so I think that this offseason may be one of the more critical off seasons in terms of training camp and practice and preseason, because there's going to be some guys on this roster who was already here fighting to keep their roster spot. And then you got the new guys who are coming in like a Robert Woods. I think Robert Woods may be one of those signings where, as a player, he wants to prove he can still play good quality football. And I don't think he was able to showcase that last year in Tennessee because of the quarterback play and the offense that they run. So now look at guys like a Nico Collins, who I'm not out on, right? But I think Nico, this is the season where you put up or shut up. I think they upgrade the quarterback position. They get better around the entire wide receiver group. I like Amari Rodgers. I hope Houston keeps him on the roster as well for the different things he can do. But I look at Robert Woods and Noah Brown, and then I look at Nico Collins, and I say, these are your competition right now. this is where you got to get better. I am intrigued by their wide receiver room because they move on from Philip Dorsett. I don't believe that they will bring back Chris Moore. At some point, they'll either move on from Brandon Cooks. A part of me believes that he may still be on his roster by the time the season rolls around. I know that's not an opinion people want to hear, but I think this room would be much better, and they address it in the draft, and they get talented receivers, younger receivers, more explosive receivers as well.
Yeah, I think, not to go hot takey in any form or fashion, but I actually don't believe the Texans will address wide receiver in the first round, like many assume. I think it's very easy as a fan to look at the draft and be like, you have 2 firsts, you're gonna go quarterback, and you're gonna pair them with a wide receiver. I can't see the Texans doing that. Nick's very much a value guy. I think they might prioritize tight end over wide receiver in this draft. There isn't if they're not going to re-sign Akins, there's really not a pass catching tight end. I'm not saying they're going to take one at 12, but I could see them going, if they go quarterback at 2, keyword if, then I think at 12 they'll grab a defensive player. I think whether it be edge or tackle or whatever it may be. And then in the second round, they'll come back and grab, a tight end and a wide receiver and a center later on in the draft. But I don't think there's this scenario where it's going to be quarterback, wide receiver. That's it. If you look at the wide receiver room, there's 2 question marks that really truly impact this team from a depth perspective. Nico Collins, can he stay healthy? If we look at the first 5 weeks on film specifically, if we just look at 5 weeks of 2022, Nico looked better. He took a massive step forward. Anybody that watched him play could see that he was a different player last year than he was in his rookie year. But again, injuries are the biggest question with Nico Collins. So we don't know what we have there. John Mechie is the other question mark. What impact can he have? Is he going to be back fully healthy? Is that something that we can bet on and guarantee? You probably can't do that because it's not a wise thing to do. Then you have Noah Brown. You have Robert Woods. I'm trying to think of who else they have. Amari Rodgers. And then you have Brandon Cooks. I think Nick's going to keep Brandon Cooks. I think from a value perspective, he's not going to be able to get what he wants from Brandon Cooks, and he'd much rather pay Brandon to play than to ship him off and not be able to replace his production potentially. Right? If you trade Brandon Cooks for a 5th round pick, you're likely not going to replace what Brandon Cooks can do in this offense with that 5th round pick. And I think that's going to be something that Nick is weighing in heavy. I think he's going to lean on D'Amico a lot for Brandon Cooks to come back and be a part of this offense. He's only got 1 more year. It's not impacting his career too much unless he gets hurt. And honestly, Brandon Cooks could make some money next offseason if he comes in this season and actually does what we know Brandon Cooks is capable of doing. So it's an opportunity for Brandon Cooks this year, for me, in my opinion. So that's kind of how I see things when it comes to the wide receiver room.
I agree with you with Brandon Cooks. I think that if Houston wanted to move on from him, they would have done it by now.
Yep.
They had their chance to strike when the iron was hot. I think with Dallas at the trade deadline, they didn't get that deal done. And from that moment on, I thought to myself, if you don't trade him now where you can get real value back, I don't see the point of trading him in the offseason when now teams have an opportunity that's not panicking. The playoffs are not here. They can address their own needs the way they see fit. I think you would have got the same value back as you would have mid-season with trade deadline. So I do see a scenario, as you mentioned, where Brandon Cooks is back in Houston. And if you go rookie in the draft, there is a small part of me that believes Case Keenum was brought in order to keep Davis Mills as a starting quarterback for 1 more year. Maybe Houston addresses the quarterback again in the draft, later in the draft, which I think that shouldn't be the route that they should go. But you give Davis Mills a familiar face again, who he's relied on in the past and had some success with in the past. And again, I think Houston, and I know that we contrasting this, but I think Houston at number 2 should draft a quarterback. But Brandon Cooks has been he's been great for Davis Mills, and he was a 3rd-round pick. So why wouldn't he be great for a 1st-round pick? So I think that, as you mentioned, Nick and D'Amico right now is very early morning, wearing out their options to see the value in leaving Cooks on a roster or moving them on.
Yeah, I think, and let's get into this part of it. So I don't think the Texans should take a quarterback at 2. Take Davis Mills out of the equation altogether. Like, Davis Mills does not influence my thought process on what the Texans should do at 2. I think that this quarterback class is very much like last year to an extent. I think there's some talented guys. I think Bryce Young is super talented. I think he is very much a general on the field, and that's the type of quarterback. He'll be a distributor. He's not going to have a big arm. He can sense pressure. He can improvise when needed. I think you could be a winner right away with Bryce Young. I don't know if that's going to be something that you're going to be able to do for a long period of time. I just can't. And here's the thing, like, everybody's saying, Carolina definitely moved up to grab Bryce Young. I can't see a scenario where Frank Reich says to the general manager of Carolina, trade all of this draft capital. I want all of it gone so I can take the biggest risk in NFL history by drafting a 5'10" quarterback. Those two just don't compute with me. It doesn't make any sense to me. No matter how talented Bryce Young actually is, that is too significant of a risk for the Panthers to take. So I think the Panthers right now are going back and forth. They're trying to get Houston to buy it to take that step forward so they can grab their guy at 2. But I think this quarterback class is I think it's an average quarterback class. I think Bryce could be the top 7 quarterback. But if I had to guess, he's probably going to be a top 10 to 15 quarterback. And everything's going to have to go right. I don't know if what he does in college is going to translate to the NFL, but it could. And that's the biggest question mark. Then you have CJ Stroud, who above average arm, played at a very simplistic offense, had some talent, had a ton of talent, actually, if we think about it. Doesn't look like the best processor, can make plays with his legs, big, strong guy. Maybe he ends up being, a top 15 to 25 quarterback. Levis, the mental game is not there, so he's automatically out of the first round, in my opinion. If you don't have any of the mental aspect, I can't take you in the first. I can't take you in the top 10 at least. Then you have Anthony Richardson, who I know everybody's already like, bro, can you stop? And I get it, and I'm not going to sell Anthony Richardson to anybody. But the way I look at the quarterback position is I want to draft the quarterback with the highest potential, because if that potential is reached, my franchise is changed from that moment forward. If Anthony Richardson is what he says, and this is not fair for him to say, and he shouldn't have said it, Cam Jackson. Right? Like, you should never have said that as a prospect, bro.
I get it. I really get it. And then as a player, you want to sell yourself. But hey, man, listen, sometimes you can just be yourself. You can just be Anthony Richardson.
Right. But like, and it was an unfair target. He should not have put on himself at all. But at the end of the day, right, like I've seen a lot of scouts that say, Cam Newton plus. And like, when you look at Cam Newton, if you're adding a plus or 2, and this has been kind of a thing throughout the scouting, Cam Newton is a Hall of Fame quarterback. Cam Newton did take his team to the Super Bowl. Like, I would always bet on that potential, but I would have to have a plan from an organizational perspective to say, this is our plan. This is our quarterback. Here's how we follow this plan, and here's how he reaches said potential. And if you're not taking Anthony Richardson, I just wouldn't take a quarterback.
Damn.
Yeah, I just wouldn't take a quarterback.
It's Cam. I'm not Cam.
Here we go. Cam Jackson.
It's Anthony Richardson or nothing for Houston.
For me, no, actually, I wouldn't take a quarterback in the first. I really like
Right,
Hendon
okay.
Hooker a lot.
I like Hooker.
If I was the Texans, I think the best plan is Will Anderson. Maybe Jalen Carter falls to 12, and you take a massive risk on that because you can afford to, given the draft capital you have. If you can hit on both those picks, that defensive line is nasty if those two work out. I would probably take Hendon Hooker at 33 because when I watch him throw and the touch he's able to put on the ball, the velocity he has, he's athletic as well. He actually reminds me, and I'm not going to put this on Twitter because I'll get murdered, but he reminds me of Deshaun Watson.
No, that's not bad to say. Oh, because it's
it is.
Okay. So okay, no, I get it because man, I was talking to my boy. We talk about football all the time, and he was afraid. Man, he reminds me of Deshaun a little bit.
Yeah,
and it was the game where, was it the Florida game?
Okay,
the Florida game, and I was like, I see it.
Yeah.
I see where you look at Hendon Hooker, who's 25. But I personally,
that doesn't bother me.
That doesn't bother me at all. But that was a game where I was thinking to myself, man, he does remind me of Deshaun Watson a little bit. And, regardless of how I think we feel here at home or the media, and by the way, I'm glad Aaron Rodgers, if we're just kind of having a conversation now, I'm going to get relaxed. I'm glad Aaron Rodgers said what he said about Adam Schefter because I've been feeling like that for a very long time. I've been feeling like these agents, these media, personalities, not the agents, but the media personalities, the local media, all of these media members are putting narratives out there to drive what they want to be right. And quite frankly,
it was happening 2 years ago.
Come on, man. And so I think that we don't have a real clue what the fuck they think in NRG.
They don't. Look, bro, I'm going to say this, and I respect
and that's a good
everybody.
Thing.
It is a great thing. I respect everybody, bro. I respect everybody. I have all the Aaron Wilsons, I can't even, I mean, Cody, for sure, Cody Davis, a big Sarge, Brandon Scott. I respect the shit out of, especially those three I just mentioned. Top tier for me. But nobody has any clue.
We don't know
what they are thinking.
We don't know.
Nobody has a clue. You have no idea. You can push your narrative, your agenda, your opinion all you want. But I promise you, you know nothing about what this team is going to do.
Nothing. And in some cases, I think that, look, I'm one of those guys where there's smoke, there's fire, right? I think that there are cases where the possibility of what's being said is real. But I think for Houston's case, man, because I think C.J. Stroud should be their quarterback. And I've heard internally in the past that they do like C.J. Stroud. But I can't sit here and say they're going to take C.J. without a shadow of a doubt. I put my mortgage on it. No, we don't really know what their plan is. And when I originally heard that, Pep Hamilton was calling plays. Lovie Smith was the head coach. Now you got Bobby Slowick and D'Amico Ryans, right? It's a whole new coaching staff. And one point that Brandon Scott made a few weeks back on one of our shows, the next time somebody gets fired, it ain't going to be the coach. It's going to be Nick. And we've heard in the past how Lovie Smith wasn't necessarily listening to the players and the confusion between front office, coach, players. I don't think that will be the case now. I think that what they were able to do was get a clear plan with one another, for one another, to work with one another to be successful. That's one thing where I judge Nick, because I've been critical of Nick. And I've said, I've never seen a general manager survive 3 head coaches in 3 years. But I've also been realistic about it and say to myself, Lovie Smith was a guy that from day one, you can see the contrast between the two. They were not on the same page. David Culley, as much of a man that he is, had his hand held throughout the entire process. So that's 2 coaches where you look and say, man, those guys wasn't going to stick around at all. And they were filler coaches. But now you have a head coach that you can trust and believe in with that plan that you envision, and that plan may be altered now because you have to really buy into what the coach wants to do. I say all of that to say this, man. We don't know what the fuck they thinking.
No, we don't.
And neither should we. We should listen.
This is how it should operate, bro.
We should operate with the aspect of let's go watch film, let's go watch tape, let's go research the good things and the bad things of the players, of the coaching staff, what they do well, and then let's compile our thoughts on what we think should happen.
Yep.
Not this is what will happen. This is what will happen. Because we've seen guys in the past, brag about what's going to happen, and it doesn't happen.
Right.
And you look like a fool. And I think that with Nick being so secretive, I don't think it's secretive. I think he's operating the way that he should. I enjoy that because, okay, when it happens, we can talk about it. We can talk about the concrete facts when it happens. Until then, the speculation is fun. The scouting aspect of it is fun. I enjoy it. I really do. Watching guys go out there and practice and looking at what they do well, what they don't do well, what they can improve on. That's one thing that I really enjoy. That's what we should be talking about. And of course, we have sources. Like we have sources. Some of those sources, they come out, they can be real, they can be potential. I get all of that. But we should get back to analyzing football from a game aspect instead of trying to be right all the time. Everybody wants to be right. Nobody wants to be, in the weight room, in the war room, looking at football.
That's right.
I'm sorry.
That's right. No, you're right, bro. You're right. And this is a good little rant to go on because it's true. Like I say it all the time on the timeline. The conversation is never a conversation. It's always a debate. And it's always about being right. Nobody walks into a conversation anymore and wants to be educated or really understand the other person's perspective and see what they can potentially pull away from that to add to what they already know. It's bright, like Bryce Young is the center of the topic and has been for 45 days. And, there's a big group of people that are pushing Bryce Young and they're saying it's like, they're adamant. John Crumpler is like, they are taking him at 2. At this point, it's on John's grave that like,
that's my boy, man.
Bryce
boy
Young
JC.
is coming. Yeah, John, right? They're taking him, and there's no other choice. And he even alludes to it in his little tweets with little little small subtle like when they take a quarterback. Like he's so smart with the way he does it. But the truth of the matter is nobody knows. Like I would not be surprised if the Texans take Will Anderson at 2. It would not shock me.
Me and John have talked about this. I met John formally, physically in Alabama last year for the Senior Bowl. So from then, between me, John, and Jordan Pond to a certain extent, but really me and John, I love Jordan. He doesn't. He's one of those guys that looks. People, he's an eye test guy.
Yeah, 100%.
And I love that about Jordan. But me and John have, we're in contact all the time. We've talked about the quarterback situation. And I know why John likes Bryce Young. So shout out to John, writes for the Texan Wire, John Crumpler. Yep. He believes, and I understand it because he's not the only one, that Bryce Young is simply the best quarterback in this draft. And if you are a team that had to sit through Deshaun Watson quitting on you, sit through Tyrod getting hurt midway through, possibly going up 2-0 in the season where everybody predicted you to lose every game against the Browns, the Davis Mills 1.5 year era, like you want the best quarterback, and I understand that. But again, man, it's one of those situations where we just don't know. We don't know their plan, man. And I like CJ Stroud over everybody. I know John likes Bryce Young, and I'm glad that you mentioned being teachable and listening because I'm one of those guys, and I still am partially 100% out on Anthony Richardson. When I watch tape. Even at the combine, I asked every football player that I know, especially the quarterback, what is the most difficult throw to make in 5 and out, 10 and out, those out routes. And he struggles on those. He struggled at the combine with it when nobody was in front of his face. Yeah. But I can sit there and listen to somebody that tells me, well, you know why he struggled in college? This was a factor, this was a factor, this was a factor, this was a factor. And that all factors into why he wasn't as good as we probably would think he should have been his last year, which is also why I think people need to stop with the Cam Newton because that's disrespectful for Cam Newton.
It's not fair
to him, but it's disrespectful
on both sides. I agree. Cam's one of my favorite players of all time in the NFL. So, I agree with you. I agree with you.
Cam
only
was
go based
a different
on
beast.
He was. I would say this when it comes to AR, and I think when I look at the totality of his college career, all of his wide receivers and tight ends are going to be UDFAs, every single one. None of them are going to be drafted. Out of 109 teams, his team ranked 107th in drop passes. Like, when I look at this, when I went to Florida and when I went to the Florida Reddit and I went through and started to read about Florida football and the offense and the scheme, from everything I was reading there was no coach there. Basically, the coach didn't give a shit. There was no support. They didn't try to fit offense around AR.
That's true.
Yeah, and then they forced him into a position the way that they had it in their mind. Didn't listen to his input or anything. Then when you listen to AR speak and you hear him talk, I got a different vibe from Anthony Richardson than I expected to get. He's very cool, calm, collected, but he's also very smart. He really understands the game.
That's true.
And now when you watch the film, there are 20 to 30 different films. Like, if you go to different plays where he's going through his fifth progression. We're not talking about 1, 2, 3, and throw. I mean, he's going through 5, and then people say he's a runner, and it's like, well, actually, when he's out of the pocket, his eyes are downfield. So, and I like him. I think Bryce, and this is where John's right, and this is where John's going to most likely end up being right, is Bryce can come in day one and make your team better. Bryce Young is Bryce Young. You're going to get Bryce Young, and that's that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just don't know what else Bryce is going to add. I just don't think that Bryce is going to be able to add anything else to his game. We get what we get, and that's not enough for me to say it to I'm comfortable taking this pick.
So I do want to say I'm glad you pointed out all those things for Anthony Richardson, because that is what I had to digest when I was critical of him. Like, everybody had to go look at this, and understand this. And I will say to people that's watching, go watch the Tennessee game to get a gist of Anthony Richardson, the highs, the lows, and his potential, right? That's the game I would point to. But with Bryce Young, man, I'm glad you said that you don't think that, he'll get better in a sense of will he surpass where he is right now? That's a great observation. And I think that's where John and a lot of people that love Bryce Young is right, because outside of his frame, and it's not his height for me, it's his frame.
Yeah, same.
Outside of that, he is undoubtedly the best quarterback in this draft.
Well, and average arm strength. I will say
okay.
that is honestly a bigger knock to me than his frame.
Okay.
But I like big arm quarterbacks. So that's personally just a preference. So it shouldn't knock him down on everybody else's board. But when I look at a quarterback and I say to myself, what are you going to fall back on when the play breaks down? And we can say in Alabama, we saw him improvise and we saw him run around, but we also saw him with huge pockets, and we saw him and it's like, so what will he be able to improvise in the NFL? At that frame, do you want him improvising in the NFL? Well, you probably don't. You probably want him in the pocket as much as possible.
Right. Which is why you trade for Shaq Mason.
Right. So if you do that, but all plays break down no matter how great of an offensive line you have.
Absolutely.
What are you going to fall back on? Well, he can't fall back on his arm. But what he can fall back on is his brain. And I think ultimately that is going to be what Nick falls in love with. And if they take a quarterback, bro, it's undoubtedly Bryce Young, in my opinion. I don't see a situation where it's not.
I think that to add to his intellect as a quarterback, he also, in his game, like it's in the DNA of Bryce Young's game, he also doesn't take hits.
Yeah, he doesn't.
So, with his frame being an issue, and this was pointed out to me by my boy, he said, man, go back and watch him. Watch how many hits that he takes. A.R. Richardson, a Will Levis, they can take those hits because they can take them. They can also give them, right? But Bryce Young understands that, and you will see him if it's getting to him.
Yeah.
I'll take the sack.
Right.
We'll live to play another down. That's also an A+ for me because that's understanding your strengths and weaknesses. And right now, your strength is my intellect. If I got time to do it and I'm going through my progress and I know where everybody's at intellectually, I can beat you. It's like a chess game with him.
Yep.
But physically, I may not be able to beat you. So what I'm going to do is live to see another down, and I'm going to go ahead and lay down, take the sack. We'll play another down.
Yeah, I think you're right. The only issue I have with relying on that is him not taking hits. Is at this next level, everything's quicker, everything's faster. Things happen that you can't see or predict. He's gonna have to learn to understand the NFL. That'll be his learning curve. It's not gonna be placement of ball, scheme, offense. None of that shit is gonna be any of his. That won't hurt him. He will come in day one. He'll understand that. But all rookie quarterbacks go through that curve of understanding the NFL and learning it. And because he's so smart, he'll probably pick it up a lot faster than most. But there's going to be some time where he doesn't. And in those moments, that's what concerns me because now you're adding his frame and everything else. And it's like,
right.
How long does he have to, avoid those hits before one hit is enough? And, we saw it with Tua.
That's
what
the biggest comparison to me when I looked at Tua and I was like, "Oh, Bryce Young," and Tua is bigger than Bryce Young.
Right, he's thick, bro. I mean, he's like Kyler. Kyler's thighs are the size of Adrian Peterson, bro. Like, I mean, so that's it. And I watched film yesterday on Bryce again, and he is a field commander. He really is, and he is perfect for this offense. There's just
you just traded for Shaq Mason.
Everything else, yeah. But you better fix that center because
that's true.
If that's coming inside, that's where you don't want it to happen. You'd rather it happen outside with Bryce than inside.
Big Sarge was on our show a couple weeks back, and he asked me with this offensive line. This was before free agency. Yeah. So this is Laramie, Kenyon, Quisenberry, Can, Howard. With this offensive line, which quarterback do you think is best for Houston? And I said, man, I think it's CJ.
Yeah.
And that's because with Bryce Young, the center guard combo that they had in place terrifies me.
Yeah.
Last season alone, which is why, people gotta stop grading Kenyon unfairly. Right. Didn't have a full offseason, was coming back from injury, 21 years old. I think he turned 21 in the middle of the season. But Kenyon went up against the gauntlet of defensive tackles for like 8 straight weeks. And he got destroyed. But I wouldn't want Bryce Young behind that center guard combo simply because if they kill you straight up and down through the middle, there's nowhere else for you to go, really. That pocket collapses and they're coming at you straight forward. What are you going to do? And that's why I would rather have a bigger quarterback like a CJ. But now when you look at Shaq Mason here in Houston, we'll see what Houston does at the center position. I can understand why. Oh, yeah, now we can go after Bryce Young because we're taking care of things up front to get him some protection in the NFL where defensive tackles now are like DNs 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where it was a DN coming out every year. Now it's a D tackle coming out every year. And these D tackles are athletic. They're running 4.7s, 4.5, 4.6s. They're strong. They're quick. They got great hands. They got good hips. They can bend. They can do all of that. And they can kill you from a 3 technique, a 1 technique. Oh, yeah, man, you better get some protection. Ain't no plan Bs in the NFL.
No, I agree. All right, well, I have a tea time in like 50 minutes. I knew this was going to happen when it was me and you. I knew it. I knew this was going to be an hour and 20 minutes. I knew that we were going to talk about everything. I'm going to have to move my schedule around now so we can start to have the music conversations and everything else because I won't be able to have it today. So I'll have to record in the evening. I'll have to record in the evening now.
If you're running, man, just say that. If you're running, just say that, man.
I mean, I got to shower, and honestly, I'm going to leave in 10 minutes, so I really push this. But, I mean, if we're going to have the whole conversation, we can. or we can tease the Hove conversation and the music conversation for that next episode.
2 minutes. Let's go. Let's go. 120 seconds. Let's go.
Listen, I am jamming. Actually, let's do this. I'll do 60 seconds of what I'm listening to and where I'm at with music right now. You do 60 seconds of what you're listening to and where you're at with music right now. Because you said something very interesting before I hit that record button. JID is a constant replay for me. I feel like he's the only one in the game that's new that I feel really has a sense of the culture and a sense of hip hop to be able to deliver and give that feeling that you get when listening to hip hop MCs. I honestly think Cole is on a run that most people aren't paying attention to. I don't think people realize the impact Cole has on music. I don't think people realize how good Cole actually is. And I think they're starting to pay attention, but I think Cole is entering God MC levels. I think he's entering Rakim. He's starting to push himself into the Nas, Hove, Rakim, Biggie style, like the way he's regarded. And I think he's going to drop another album, and I think it'll definitely be the place he's at. I'm listening to Earth Gang a lot. Nas is definitely in the mix because there's a lot of good Nas albums that have been released over the last 3 years. I'm trying to think of who else that's new that I'm listening to. I think that's actually it, bro. Like, I don't think I'm listening to anything else new. I can't find a good one I like.
Yeah, right now for me, I'll say this because this is one of the arguments James and I has had. It's gotten fun. I will say this: past their prime last decade, Nas has been a better rapper than Jay-Z. He's been putting out better music than Jay-Z. Right now, for me, musically, I think that rap is dead. So what I've been doing is I've been revisiting eras. I've been stuck in the blog era. The Wale, the Coles, the Currencies, the early versions of Wiz and K-Dot. And I've really been jamming a lot of Big Crit lately. Been real down south with it.
Favorite
King
Crit
Remember the Time. Favorite Crit mixtape?
Yeah. Crit was here.
Return of Forever.
Okay. A King Remember the Time for me is,
but it's right.
I know.
It's right there. And I think production wise is when you look. I can see people say it was King Remember the Time over Return of Forever because production wise on that tape was crazy. But I also been going back listening to a lot of old Houston rap too, just Big Pokey, Kiki, kind of revisiting my roots and everything. So I'm not current in rap right now. I think that it's so watered down. It's full of trap. It's full of fentanyl. It's full of things that at one point it was cool to mix in because everything else had a lot of substance. Yeah. But it's too much of it. It's too much TikTok music. Too much. So I've been revisiting when rap was good, when rap was creative, when rap was full of life and energy, not as dead as it is right now. And that's just where I'm at.
I'm going through my like recently. I've been jamming Black a lot. I'm a big fan of Black. You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, 6 Lack.
Well, yeah, I don't know what else I'm supposed to say, bro. I love his music. I think the way he can rap, he can sing. He's super talented. Actually, the other guy, and you said the older generations you're going back to. Lloyd Banks dropped 2 albums in the last 3 years that are actually like really good.
Banks and Jim Jones dropped 2 good projects. Jim Jones dropped a very good project. I just downloaded Paid in Full by Eric B. and Rakim. So I've been listening to. I'm serious, man. I've been going back trying to figure out, like, you know, the greats of the greats. Why are they regarded like that?
I've been listening to a lot of Ludacris.
One of my favorites of all time. My top.
Yeah, he's
5.
one of my favorites too. He's one of my. He might be in my top 5. The Made You Look remix was a different beast for me. It definitely convinced me more and more about Luda and what he can do. But yeah, that's my music.
Been listening to a lot of Project Pat, the Locks.
Okay. I love the Locks.
Between Money, Power, Respect, and the other one with Ride or Die on there.
Yep.
I love New York, the essence of New York rap.
Me too.
Been listening to a lot of that. Sauce Walker, by the way, I don't know how people feel about him, but
I'm not a big
late
fan.
Last year, he dropped a very good album. When Sauce Walker raps, Sauce Walker be rapping his ass off. So, I've been kind of either revisiting old projects, like when I say old, I mean like 20 years ago or that blog era, or just been in the South with my music right now. Classic South, Big Pokey, Kiki, Don't Mess with Texas, and just trying to, get back to a place where rap was really enjoyable. So from the South to the West Coast, shout out to Snoop for putting Death Row back on streaming services. Been going back just across the state, United States, listening to old good music. That was fun.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, we're definitely gonna have to do this again. Like I said, I'm gonna move my schedule around so I can record with you at night, and we can because I appreciate you waking up early, especially on spring break. Means a lot. I really do appreciate it. John Hickman, tell my followers, my listeners, everybody that's engaged and watching right now, where they can find you, where they can find Cody and Locked On Texans, social media, all that good stuff. And bro, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you, bro. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Locked On Texans at Locked On Texans on Twitter and YouTube. You can find Cody on Twitter at Cody Davis24, I believe. But man, I wanna say that before we get out of here, man. I semi like where Texans Twitter is right now. Everybody finding their own lane. And creating their own lane, having fun with it, believing what they believe and sticking to their guns. I respect all of that. I do feel, though, people just need to be a whole lot more respectable.
I would agree.
Some of these people you may or may not know in real life, and you don't know how they're going to react to some of these things, and understand that we are in a new day and age, and so going outside used to physically mean going outside to get an escape, but now getting an escape is going outside and getting on your phone still. But Twitter's a playground for a lot of people, so just be a whole lot more respectable. You may not know how somebody may pop off, and have fun with it, man. Like, everybody's not right, everybody's not always wrong, but mix and mingle ideas and have fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, John, thank you again, bro. I really appreciate it. We'll do this again. Texans Unfiltered. Make sure you guys click like, subscribe, follow, turn on the bell for notifications. Follow me on the podcast. Follow me on Twitter. With that being said, I'm signing off for Texans Unfiltered. I'm Youngarigold. We'll catch you guys next week.